Hello, welcome to Who's Agile. My name is Yves Hanul, and today I'm going to talk with Elisabeth Hendrickson. Welcome, Elisabeth.
Hi, thank you so much. It's so good to be here.
It's great to have you here. It took a while because of practical technicalities on my side. I think mostly on recording, but because you were actually the very first person I invited, and for multiple reasons you will be aired not as the first one. But I'm really glad that we can have this conversation. So, Elizabeth, for the people who don't know you, tell a little bit who are you?
Oh, I never know what to say about myself. I've been involved in the Agile community since maybe 2002 or 2003, something like that. I
Mhm.
was a member, I was a board member for the Agile Alliance and on the program committee for the Agile Conference. I have a long history in software development. I wrote my first line of code in 1980. I spent a fair bit of time in testing and QA. I wrote a book called Explore It. And these days, I focus more on the holistic view of software development, not just any single piece of it.
Wow, and that's a very short introduction for actually a very large career, I would say. But yeah, I know how awkward it always is to introduce you, especially if you have such a large career with so many different things. So I understand it. But that's also one of the reasons why it's interesting to have you introduce yourself, because then you can, well, focus a little bit on what you want to focus. Maybe I would have focused more on the book or on other parts. So yeah, but glad to have you here on Who's Agile. So I want to start to kick off immediately with that very first question. What is something that people usually don't know about you, but has influenced you in who you are?
Yeah. When I was a kid, we moved a lot. And it's not something I usually talk about. But
Mhm.
from first grade through high school, I attended 7 different schools across 3 different states. And so I became really used to being the new kid and having to kind of land on my feet and adapt to a new school, new teachers, new social culture, find a new social circle. And it turns out that this has really come in handy as I've had to navigate different work environments. I spent a long time as a consultant. And so that ability to kind of dive into a completely new context, I credit that with my childhood history.
And like you say, when you come to a new team, it usually has a completely different culture. So if you go to different schools, different cultures, I assume all classes they have their own kind of culture. We generally don't talk about that, but that's yeah, that's how it is as kids. And I
Yes.
can imagine that, yeah, well, it's something it might not have been fun at first, but when you can look back at that, that's an interesting way to look at things, I can imagine. So
Yeah,
that's
it definitely wasn't fun as a kid. It was really hard.
I can imagine, and but that's because of what your parents did, or how did this? I don't know if you want to talk about it, but if
Oh,
there.
I mean, sure. It's because I often get asked, "Oh, was your dad in the military?" Because then you have to move around a lot. In my case, it's more because I don't know. I would say my dad, when I was growing up, kind of had restless legs. he he was always curious about what was around the corner, what would be that opportunity in that other place, and so it was really more his career, and as he navigated his career, that took us to different states and different cities.
Okay, so it was really more a choice, like you say, in especially in the US in the military, you basically have to do whatever the military decides. But in this case, it's his decision that moved you around, and I can imagine that you were, as a kid, not always happy to do that kind of thing. And I assume also, well, these days with the internet, we can kind of keep connected, or children can kind of try to keep connected with old friends. But at that time, you completely lost your old friends, like from immediately, I would say.
we became pen pals because the Postal Service did exist. I'm not quite so old that the Postal Service didn't exist, but you're totally right that it wasn't that same immediacy of being able to capture a selfie or a video and then text that to a friend or do Zoom calls or something like that. At that time, long distance calls were ridiculously expensive, like seriously ridiculously expensive. You would take a timer out and you would have a timer and you would have 3 minutes on your long distance call, because if you exceeded that, then it was a budget buster for most households. And so calls were non-existent or were incredibly short. So it was difficult, but I also got a lot of practice being a correspondent, which does not explain why I am so bad at being a correspondent now. Doesn't make any sense.
So you wrote a lot of letters and you received a lot of letters. Yeah, that's actually
Yeah.
brings me back to my childhood as well. I wrote quite some letters, and indeed, well, it can take weeks before you get an answer. You don't always know. Okay, so that yeah, it definitely is a completely different life that I don't think my children can imagine how that is these days.
No, I tell my kids these things and they cannot conceive of such a world.
I can imagine. Well, let's talk about conceiving another world. If you would not have been into IT, what can you conceive? Can you have an idea what would have become of you?
I genuinely have no idea. When I was growing up, my parents used to say about me that I was so good at arguing that I would become a lawyer. But I don't really think that's necessarily true.
Mhm.
I maybe I would have become a writer, or but I genuinely don't know, because at this point I love software development so much. I love being able to play in this world of electrons where we create the laws of physics that we have to work within. That's the architecture of the systems that we build. And so it really is the world of imagination. If you can imagine it, you can build it. And I cannot think of another world that would be as much fun to be in.
Well, as a writer, you could create your own world as well a little bit. There's even less laws of physics. You can do everything there. But yeah, it's a completely different world, of course. Indeed, that's a different thing. And you don't see the reactions of the people who read your books in that sense. With software, there is an opportunity to kind of have feedback from the people that use your software. Doesn't always work the way out we think they will work out. Yeah, that's a kind of way of doing that. That's yeah, but yeah, you're right. It's for a lot of people very hard. It's one of the hardest questions to answer for people to really like what would have been. Some have some idea, but for a lot of people, I received a lot of yeah, people tell me like this is really the hardest one. Well, then what is another, or well, we're talking about difficulties. What is for you the biggest challenge, and why is it a good thing for you?
So as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, you and I actually had this conversation once before. This one's going a little bit differently than that one did.
Hmm.
Last time, my biggest challenge was I was trying to figure out how to do time management, where I was juggling these fixed things in my calendar, but then also needing to carve out time to really have flow. And I'm still working on that because I think that's going to be a lifelong thing, figuring out how to
Hmm.
juggle the different responsibilities that I have, to create time for everything I need to do. But these days, the thing that I'm really focused on, that is a good thing because it's a little bit humbling. I'm trying to roll the snowball on my own startup and figuring
Hmm.
out how to steer towards value where it's actually a viable product with a viable revenue stream. It forces me to go back to all of those principles that theoretically I know and I have practiced as an executive in a public company, but actually going back to, okay, I'm bootstrapping this thing. It wouldn't make sense to go get funding. So I have very limited resources. And in those very limited resources, how am I going to steer towards value that somebody would actually pay for? That is what I am working on this week. So it's very current, and it's good for me because it reminds me that this stuff is genuinely hard, and So it's easy to gloss over how difficult that is when, you're reading articles on growth hacking and people are talking about, oh, you just do this one weird trick, or you're working with other companies and seeing the mistakes they make, and being able to go to think to myself how I am having to navigate that same set of challenges, and I have a lot more empathy for the people who are doing it on a larger scale than I otherwise might. So it's really good for
Yeah,
me.
I remember that, well, sometimes as a consultant or as a coach, we don't always realize how hard it is for the people that we're helping. Like you say, we know this, we kind of know it in theory, but when you do it for yourself, it's really hard, and like you say, sometimes you need to steer, and maybe you take a decision that you kind of feel is not the best one, but it's needed right now because you need that little funding to survive. And then maybe later you can go to that path, or maybe you can go to another path. But taking these decisions, that's, and I remember when I think when we met 2010, 2012, you also had another kind of thing you were playing around with, Entaggle, that I know. That was, I don't know if there was actually a real business model behind it, but I remember having discussions about that kind of stuff, that it was hard to, yeah, it was a good idea, but there was not really money behind that. So, and that's, yeah, that's one of the things that I admired you in, that you were not afraid to jump into that, to try it out, because that's what I think is also, well, one of the things I recognize in a lot of agilists is that we're not afraid to try out something and play with it, and to keep remembering with today a colleague told me, like, it's with your mud in the feet, your feet in the mud, and you really feel it again, and you start to understand. And that generally is a good thing, but it's also hard, like you say. It's sometimes like, damn it, okay, yeah, I know, but yeah, why can't it just be this today or this week a little bit easier and whatever. It's
Yeah, Entaggle is worth mentioning because that one, genuinely, there was no business model. It was truly a if I build it, they will come kind of thing. That was not. I had no idea how I was going to turn that into a business, but I had an itch so strong that I had to scratch it. Entaggle, and nobody knows what it is, so I'd better explain it. It was the idea there was basically crowd-based recognition as an alternative to certification. So these days, LinkedIn, you can not just give recommendations, which existed even then, but you can also tag people with skills. And so there's on LinkedIn, there's a feature now that was essentially kind of like my entire concept for a software as a service offering. And part of what I was reacting to there was agile certifications were the hot topic, and there was an agile tester certification. There were all kinds of certifications cropping up, and I had a very negative reaction to what a lot of what I saw happening, which I viewed as monetization of a space that was cheapening it to a degree where it was no longer about learning how to do things well, deliver value incrementally. It was about get your certification so you can charge more money. And I had a problem with that. And I wanted to see something that was more grassroots, where if the problem you're trying to solve is how do I know that this coach, this agile coach, is any good, or how do I know that this person knows what they're talking about? Well, you would have this trusted network. And it was building on work that a concept, not building directly on the work, but we vouch for was something that I believe it was Brian Merrick and Laurent Beaucevy had started. And I love that concept. They hadn't been able to make that continue to work either by this time. By the time Entaggle came along, we vouch for was gone. It probably would have been better for me to do some experimentation and figure out where a business model would have been. But I was just so intent on figuring out how to disrupt certifications. And ultimately, I couldn't justify the expense of keeping the service up and the dealing with the spammers who wanted to add certifications for Christian Louboutin shoes or whatever. That was a big problem that I had to fight on that service.
Yeah, because it basically anyone could vouch for anyone and could just add tags and whatever. It was a very open system by design, I would say, because that's the advantage, but it was also the disadvantage on everything you had to do then on the back end, I suppose.
Kind of
That
a
was
nightmare. Yep.
actually it was not so visible for me as a user at that time, so that means also that you could hide it very well, so that's nice. But it was only after that you tear down the service that we had a conversation and I realized how big that problem was. So that was but yeah, and I guess you learned a lot about bootstrapping a service and about what you need to do for these kind of things. It also for me drives me immediately that other question, what drives you, because you already kind of shown that you're a rather driven person, because you didn't like the problem of certification and you wanted to be, well, you want to be part of a solution. That's what I see a lot in you. So is there anything else, what drives you?
Ultimately, I would say that these days there are two things that I can point to that drive me. One that may not have come across with the whole certification story, but curiosity. I love learning. I am an insanely curious person, and so I love that process of discovery. And for me,
Mhm.
that's actually a lot of what exploratory testing is. You're discovering the capabilities and limitations of a given system. So you're kind of discovering how it was put together and what it can and can't do and where some of the gotchas are. And so that's the process of discovery. And I love applying that same thing to understanding organizations or understanding technology or understanding communities and what drives the community. So relentless curiosity is one. And the other one that's really driving me now that I've achieved a certain age in this industry and I've seen a lot of contexts, a lot of companies, a lot of teams, a lot of executives, just a lot of software developers. I've seen a lot. And one of the things that concerns me is creating work environments that are humane and sustainable. So delivering a continuous stream of value at a sustainable pace for me while adapting to the changing needs of the business. That is a succinct statement that describes what Agile is. And that's one of the reasons why I was
Mhm.
so drawn to Agile. But the key thing about sustainability is that it's not just about the code base or maintainability or the business model. It's also about the people within the system. And so, like when we look at operations teams that are drowning in alerts and working ridiculous numbers of hours to keep a service up, that is not sustainable and it becomes inhumane. And so finding ways to help organizations be much more thoughtful about creating environments where the people can really thrive is super important to me.
I like that you link that, and I would say it's one of the well, the challenges of agile, in the sense that we attract the people, we give them an environment to do the right thing, to do the things they care about. But then, because we deliver every week or every 2 weeks or multiple times a day, it can drive people to burnout, and actually the good people to burn out faster, because yeah, we offer them the opportunity, and sometimes people, especially the driven people, they might not look or care for, well, they care for themselves, but they don't always realize how hard it is. And like you say, if you're drowned into problems from systems or for something else, that is definitely something we need to be careful for. And I don't think well, it's because of agile, but definitely agile can make it worse, because we have this continuously thing. If you deliver something every 2 years, it's a lot easier for people to say, okay, now not. But in the world that we live today, when we deliver multiple times a day, yeah, that's a big risk. The
Yeah.
curiosity also reminds me, I want to go back a little bit about a project. If I remember correctly, not only did you do Entaggle, but you also had at that time or around that time some kind of what is it, a workshop or a place where you let people explore things? Could you, and if I remember correctly, this is a picture from that environment.
Oh wow, you've got a picture of Agile up to here. That's great. That brings back memories. Yeah. Um, so what you're looking at here is the space that I created called Agilistry Studio, as in Agile plus artistry, and studio because it was intended to be a practice space for Agile software development. And this is one of the events that we held there. It was about 1,000 square feet. It had light and windows. It was very inspired by the offices of Pivotal Labs at that time. Pivotal Labs went through many iterations, but at circa 2009, 2010, they had all modular furniture. It was all relatively inexpensive but sturdy stuff from IKEA. And so I actually literally bought the same tables and the same monitors and had the same kind of pairing set up. And the idea of the studio is that we could hold workshops, we could hold traditional classroom training for like teaching people TDD or whatever. And we could hold events like this. So Agile Up to Here was an event where we brought together what you're looking at, some really famous people, actually. And I was so honored to get to work with them. John Bach is the person right in the center. On the left side in the picture to John Bach is Alan Cooper, who wrote The Inmates Are Running the Asylum, and is very, very famous in the design community and is an incredible person. You can see Jeff Patton on the far left, and I saw him in your intro picture of Who is Agile, so I know you've interviewed him. You can see the back of Matt Barcom's head. You can see the back of Katrina, and this is so embarrassing that I am blanking on her last name, but she's the one who started Exorcism, and which is a phenomenal resource for learning languages and practicing idiomatically in those languages. The back of Dale Emery's head to Katrina's right, Pat Maddox, Tamer Sala, Randall, just an amazing group of people. And we came together to build software to see, okay, so we're going to have a week. Alan is going to be our product manager. He's got the vision for what we're building. We were building his homonym website, and all of us came together to practice strict extreme programming and see how far we could get in a week and what we could learn about agile development in that process. And Jeff acted like as a coach for us and helped us with the user story mapping. It was a phenomenal experience, and that was exactly the kind of thing I built Agilistry for. Unfortunately, Agilistry is another thing that I couldn't really figure out how to make enough money on it to keep the lights on.
Well, so sorry, I put you on the spot because I literally, when I looked today for pictures from you, I came across this picture and I thought, oh, I should just add it to it, because indeed it's an incredibly amount of people. Actually, you mentioned that I have Jeff is indeed on my list of people that I want to interview. I haven't interviewed him yet. I don't think. Well, I think I have already invited him, but I'm not sure if he replied already. But already people have asked me to interview him because indeed he belongs here, I think. But yeah, it's one of these things that I like about you. You try out these kind of things, and you want to learn from it.
Okay. And I also just remembered her name, and I highly recommend, if you can get her, to interview her, Katrina Owen. She is amazing, and she had this vision for Exorcism that since then, I don't know if you've looked at that site, but it has grown and has such an amazing community behind it. But it really, she was, as far as I know, the person who started that. So Katrina Owen, she is amazing.
That name rings a bell. I'm not sure if she's on my list, but she's now, from now on. Let's consider that. So if you, well, I will email her. Okay, that brings me to that next question. I'm not sure if one of these are the ones, but what is your biggest achievement? Because we talked about some achievements. Maybe there is something else.
Yeah, I actually. I wouldn't have even put Entaggle in it or Agilistry in biggest achievement, because as much as I was passionate about what I was building, in the end, it did not it, achieve. I mean, they both died, so they were not exactly successes. I didn't have, wild visions of massive amounts of money coming from them, but they didn't even make enough to keep the lights on. And so instead, I would look to some of the work that I have done with much larger organizations. And over the last many years, at one point, I was involved with, ultimately was responsible for leading an R&D organization that was building enterprise software that before I got there, it was struggling to ship.
Mm-hmm.
The team itself was underfunded, and customers were super frustrated with the lack of quality. And over the course of a couple of years where I was deeply immersed with that team, we collectively, so it's not like this is my sole success, it was a whole team, but we collectively really transformed from couldn't ship software to save our lives. Honestly, it was we had not done. I think it had been 18 months since we had done an actual GA'd release of software. We could ship patches, but to actually do a release, it had been a long time, and we transitioned to the point where we could ship high quality software on a monthly basis faster than our customers could take the releases that we were delivering, and the quality went up substantially. And ultimately, I mean, that product is still going, and it's still a success for the customers, for the team, and a financial success for that company. So I would say that I look back at that time and I think about all the steps that we had to take to make that transformation possible. And that, I think that one, it's not my achievement alone. It took a whole team of people to make that happen. But I'm really proud of the team.
But you partially also created an environment where that team could do it, because you led that part, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I was responsible for it. I was the leader of that organization.
Yeah, and as a good leader, you don't want to take responsibility, because indeed that's how you do it. If you would claim everything, then you probably would not have succeeded. Or at least that's what I see with a lot of people when the managers or whatever, what we call them, want to claim it too much. Then it's a lot harder to success. So that's actually one of the discussions I had today at a company I'm with. But it's a very nice story, because like you say, if before you came or when you came, and if you can't release and it takes you 18 months to release something, and then you can go on a monthly basis, that's an extreme change for a company. And like you say, and for the customers, because probably all of a sudden it goes rather fast. But then it's their choice. If they want to implement it or not, and that's helps a lot, of course. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
A couple things are worth noting. Yes, you're right. I will take the blame, but not the sole credit. And then the second thing is, monthly might not sound like it's that frequent when you read books that talk about deploying multiple times a day. And this is where it's super important to recognize the extent to which context matters. This was shipping enterprise software. We were actually delivering it to our customers, who then ran it completely independent of us. And so that monthly cadence was, frankly, our customers were blown away that we could ship high quality software that quickly.
Yeah, and that's also worth mentioning, that it's just not shipping every month, but it stays within quality. And probably with a lot less needed for patching at that moment, because if you have higher quality, if you can ship that quickly, you don't have to ship very quick updates, which is also better for your customers, because otherwise you might only ship it every 18 months. But if you have a large problem, you need to ship very quickly a patch, that they have to install very quickly, completely not prepared. So that's that's a big achievement, and a very good also for your customers. Okay, I want to go to that next question about personal agility. And I remember that was a very interesting conversation we had last time. So I'm not sure if it's still the same, but what is your personal agility tip to share for the people?
Ah, wow. I hope I don't end up disappointing you since you remembered that being a great part of the previous conversation. Um, I guess to back up and let's just talk about what agility is. And I mentioned this before, but to me, ultimately, a succinct statement of agility is that it's the ability to deliver a continuous stream of value at a sustainable pace while adapting to the changing needs of the business. And so when you look at a personal context, what does that mean? And it means doing little things, little bits of things consistently while taking care of yourself and your well-being, and both mental and physical well-being, and being open to changing direction. And when we look at the last 2 years, it's been wild. We've been in the middle of this pandemic that's forced so many individuals and families to change so much. I mean, schools open, schools close, schools open, schools close. There's mask mandates, there aren't mask mandates. At the very beginning, we all had no idea what this thing was. And we didn't know how to treat it. And we were all learning so much, but we're learning in this incredibly high stakes environment. And now, we have so much more information available to us, but there's still so much uncertainty. Is it safe to go eat in a restaurant with masks off, surrounded by other people? Just everything that has happened in the last 2 years, I think, has tested every single one of us. And so personal agility means being able somehow to roll with it while keeping yourself and your family and all of those around you, safe and supported, both mentally and physically, because I think that one of the things we're going to be learning in the next decade is the extent to which the physical damage that the disease has done is terrible, and long COVID is real, and it's going to present tremendous medical challenges. But the trauma that people have experienced from this is also very, very real. So, yeah.
But I like what you say, because basically, for me, personal agility is adapting to the situation we have, or agile is adapting to the situation. And the last 2 years were wild. I think that's the right word to use. And indeed, for me, it's also not surprising that I see most people that are kind of surviving in a positive sense, are kind of being able to adapt, are usually the people who are having a big agile mind, because they have already been able to think and adapt. But we've been challenged in so many ways the last 2 years, in things that we couldn't foresee. And so in that sense, that's definitely part of what of our life the last 2 years. And I'm glad that you say that we're not going to, we don't see the impact yet. It will only be when COVID is gone that we'll see the longer, like you say, long COVID is something that is, that it starts to become visible for the people that got infected in the beginning, let's put it like that. It's, for me, not yet clear the people who have been affected with the last version, Omicron. Will they also suffer long COVID or not? It's completely unknown. I see a lot of people struggling with depression, with all kind of mental health issues, in different kind of ways, and it's not always clear. And because people are stuck at home, we don't always realize who has the problems and who doesn't. So that's definitely something we definitely see this. And we don't see it yet, that's the thing. We will only see this in the next 2 years, I think. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really important thing. Then I want to go to, well, because we're all at home, because of COVID, like we just talked about, is there anything that you've learned about remote work that you want to share with us?
Uh, yeah, the first thing is invest in a good microphone. I have a thing for microphones, and just within the space on my table in front of me, I have different microphones for different purposes. And
Wow.
I guess that the number one thing that I've learned is that my thing about microphones isn't actually so weird, and it is super important to have a good microphone. I think the other thing that I am really getting much better at now is closing the door on my office. I'm fortunate enough to have a home office that I work from,
Hmm.
and so creating a little bit of separation between the rest of my life and my work life, I create time boundaries and space boundaries that allows me to disengage, because otherwise I would be working basically 24/7. Because I am I hardly leave. I've seen a lot of these four walls.
Hmm.
So I think that's the other thing that I've learned is create some sense of separation in whatever way you can.
Okay, but I like these are both, again, both very separate but important things. Yeah, indeed. I just had a corporate meeting today where basically the main remark was to actually very high up executives, like, sorry, we can't hear you. And then they had to repeat stuff. And it's like, yeah, because they don't have good equipment. And we've been here for 2 years at home, and people still don't have good equipment. And I can understand in some situations where you don't have the money, but in this case, this was a high executive from a big corporation with a few thousand people. So I was expecting that this person would just invest in good material. Or the corporation does it. I don't care who pays for it, but we should have at least. It shouldn't be a meeting where you have 200-300 people where people have to repeatedly say, "Sorry, I can't hear you. Can you repeat this?" The nuances that you hear in the voice when you have good equipment or bad equipment is just tremendously different.
Of course, having
So
said that,
yeah.
I really hope that my voice is coming across well to you. I am using a high quality microphone, but that doesn't mean that we don't have technical gremlins. So hopefully the sound is okay.
Well,
And
so far it's a lot. It's going great. I hear it. I have to look or listen back afterwards, of course. But I actually also, well, to give a little bit insight to the people, the last conversation we had, the sound was really good. The image was good, but it was out of sync, and it was completely out of sync at different times. So it's not that I could say, okay, let's put 5 seconds here at the beginning and it becomes better. No, it for whatever strange reason, the tools that I was using at that time, it didn't help. But again, we experiment, and this is what's hopefully a lot better. And I
so
like
that,
also the fact. Yeah, go
no,
ahead.
go ahead. Sorry.
Well, what I wanted to add is the second part is creating the boundaries, both physically and time is another thing that is important in our remote work. Um, yeah, it's a message that I've been saying sometimes or sharing. It's like, yes, we're working from home, but for some people, it feels like we're living at work the last 2 years because it's like intermingled somehow, and yeah, and if you're driven, like I would assume both of us, it's dangerous to keep working and to keep things saying. Sometimes you need to look for the boundaries and say, okay, what is it still giving me energy? Does it work for the people around us and everything around that? So it's a very important. But you wanted to add something else?
Well, I was just thinking about your executive and wondering if maybe they didn't ever have real feedback on the quality of their microphone because people were intimidated about telling them, hey, your mic is terrible. Let's get you a different one. So it does occur to me, I should have asked you for feedback at the very beginning before we even started recording on the sound quality. But I also wonder if maybe there are circumstances where somebody who has, it's not a money issue, it's a knowledge issue. They don't even know how bad it sounds because they're never listening to themselves.
Well, it's another good tip. Let's listen to yourself. Actually, when I do recordings, I listen to myself, not because I like to listen to hear myself talk, but just to learn from it. And usually when I listen back to talks that I did, it's usually the opposite. It's like, oh God, I made that mistake and I did this. But I also learn a lot, like you say, about microphones, about background noises, about maybe lightning, other kind of things. And that's yeah, it's but I already wrote it down. After that meeting, I'm going to send a little message to that person like, this is probably a microphone issue. And yeah, they thought it was a connection issue, but I think it's a microphone. Well, I'm pretty sure it's a microphone issue. So I will definitely give that kind of feedback. That's also the kind of thing that I cannot resist telling and giving that feedback to people, because I think it's important that people learn. And like you say, sometimes it's, in this case, I'm pretty sure it's not a money issue, but it's probably is indeed a knowledge issue that people don't realize that. Um, and that's also something I've learned, that I've seen the last 2 years. You see a lot of people caring about it and learning and looking it up, and other people, well, because of the hard part that the pandemic is, they don't invest in it, because in the sense that investing time in figuring it out, because it's been hard. And so if nobody tells them like, this is a problem or this is, then yeah, then that can be. I want to go to the next question, about what's the last book. And I remember that you said last time you read a lot of books at the same time, but you don't always well, yeah, you read a lot of books, and but it's not so much about finishing. But what is something you want to share about a book that you read?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been revisiting books that I have read before, and one of my perennial favorites is Dominica DeGrandis's book. Yes, that one, Making Work Visible. So good. So many techniques for really creating visibility around the work that we do and understanding where things are going wrong. So highly recommended. And it's done in such a wonderful, slightly whimsical style. So that is a perennial favorite of mine. Since we last talked, I have actually succeeded at finishing multiple fiction books. I've really struggled to have the attention span to read and finish entire books. And so I am super glad that some of the steps that I'm taking to make my life more sustainable are showing up in my ability to actually let things go and focus and read fiction. That's been lovely.
It's also nice. It's also nice. Well, I was hoping you would mention the same book, because that I remember last time we didn't talk up front about it, and but yeah, it's a book that I've actually I have it, but I haven't finished it myself, and it actually grew on my or it became bigger on my list since you talked about it last time, but yeah, I haven't finished it either. That's the other part about doing these interviews. I hear about new books all the time. It's like, oh, I need to put this one on the list and this one on the list. But it's indeed the parts that I read about it, and yeah, I really like it, because it's so crucial in a lot of what we do in Agile, making the work visible, making things visible. Um, it shouldn't be always necessary, but for whatever reason it is, and it looks so simple, but it's not. It's a lot harder than a lot of people realize. So that's so thank you for sharing that. So then I come to that question that for me is the most fun to ask, is that, what question do you think I should also ask, and what's the answer?
Yeah, and I think I did not have a good answer last time, and I think I have a better
Mhm.
answer this time. And that is, what is something that we don't talk enough about in the context of software development, not even just agile, but software development.
Mhm.
And I've been thinking a lot lately about the nature of partnership, and I participated in writing a white paper about this, with oh wow, I should have prepped and had all of my co-authors names in front of me, but there's Oh, I'll have to get you that information separately. But the
I'll
entire
add the
premise.
links in the yes.
Okay. The entire premise, though, is about partnership. And
Hmm.
I've been thinking a lot about that lately. And what makes for a good partnership? How do you know you have a good partnership? And why is that important? And so let me explain a little bit more. Like, let's just take the classic case of the business is pushing the software, the technology team really
Hmm.
hard, driving them really hard. Why haven't you delivered that yet? You haven't done anything for us lately. Why can't you ship decent quality software? Why are our users always yelling at us? So, business is being very blamey, and the technologists are feeling very beat up and defensive and like, well, why don't you understand anything about what is and is not feasible? And you keep trying to go with the cheapest possible solution, and in it, right? And this is obviously not
The
healthy,
fight.
the fight. And this is, one of the things that was at the core of agile from the very beginning is the idea of, okay, obviously the fight doesn't make any, that's not going to get us anywhere. So
No.
what would be better? And so we start to see the notion of the product owner or the product manager being an embedded part of the team. So it's not that partnership wasn't in agile from the beginning, but now let's expand that even further. Because as we look at the rise of DevOps and operations teams, it's classic in organizations to have two teams that are dependent in some way on one another, or the dependency graph goes just one way, but either way, they are separate teams, and therefore they
The
end up
silos.
with silos and separate incentive structures. And so how do you actually create an environment in which they can partner? And so thinking in terms of, first of all, what is a partnership? It's one where we have the same goals, and so we can be aligned on the same goals. It's like teaming in that sense. And we work together to create transparency, so we have a shared basis in fact, and then we can all look at it and say, all right, we agree, this is what we want to achieve, so these are our goals, and then these are the things that are impediments that are preventing us together from achieving
Hmm.
those goals, and we can work on those together. And so it's really about teamwork at an organizational level that crosses boundaries, where teams are able to work together with, not for. I'm going to work with you to solve this problem instead of I am going to presume that I can solve this problem for you. So that's the thing that I would love for us as an industry to get way better and better vocabulary around talking about, is that nature of partnership. And because I think that that's going to help with some of the really challenging situations that people find themselves in organizations where the blame fest goes on, and create a more sustainable and humane environment at work.
Wow. It's yeah, it's you mentioned DevOps, and Patrick Dubois, who coined the name, is a personal friend of mine who's in the Belgian community. And I remember having a similar kind of conversation with him, I think a year or two before he even organized DevOps for the exact same thing. He's well, fed up was maybe the wrong strong word, but he felt the same thing. Like I'm working with operations, and I'm in development, and so how do we make it better for, I think, rather similar kind of things. Yeah, it's for him. I remember another conversation with him that he said, "Well, I don't like the fact that the D and the O have capitals, because then it looks again like separate silos. And for me, it's DevOps is one thing. It's we want to collaborate and we want to work together." And like you say, it is in the manifesto, but we sometimes keep forgetting that part about, okay, we want to have customer collaboration, and like you say, collaboration across multiple things, independent of whatever. It's a very important, yeah, important thing, and then the next step to work on, I think. It doesn't mean that all the other things are solved. Far from. There's still a lot of other things, but it's indeed one of these things that we should get better at from a community point of view. I like that. It's and indeed, it's. I remember the struggle last time answering that question. So this is a huge difference. Indeed, it's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. It's really. Uh, Alone for that, I'm already happy that we recorded it. So that's already worth it. So that's fine. So brings me to that last question. Who do you think I should ask next?
Katrina Owen, Dominica DeGrandis, and I would love you to interview Dale Emery. He doesn't know that I am suggesting him, so but he's done a lot of really interesting work over the years on things like resistance as a resource. So
Resource, yes.
that would be a great conversation.
Yeah, just that phrase, resistance as a resource. Every time somebody talks about resistance, I think about Dale, and I think it was a session. I'm not even sure it was an official session at an Agile conference, but I do remember a conversation with him, at least after a session or something, about him explaining it, because indeed, yeah, we all have resistance at some point, if it's either in our personal work or with the clients or with whatever. And thanks to Dale, I think I get less frustrated. I'm not saying I don't get frustrated anymore, because I do sometimes feel like, ah! But thanks to Dale, I now understand that it's actually a good thing that I see the resistance. Because before I would say I'd rather not see it, but that's not true, because there could be problems that I don't see. And thanks to Dale, I realized that actually is a gift to me, that it brings me something, and that actually, when there is a resistance, this is a kind of communication like anything else, and that gives me a possibility to have a conversation. And I've seen it in myself. The moment that I don't reject anymore, that I don't resist anymore, it's the moment I don't care anymore about something, and then it's much worse. And that is something I learned from Dale. There's actually a lot more, and I'm sure that I can have a lot of conversations with Dale. So thank you for inviting him, and the two ladies as well. So I'll definitely have that conversation. So Elisabeth, if people want to contact you, what would be good ways to find more about you?
Sure. My Twitter handle is the only social media that Twitter is the only social media I do these days, and so my Twitter handle is Test Obsessed. I also, as I mentioned, I'm rolling the snowball on a new startup that this time I did not start with "If I build it, they will come," but I did succumb a little bit to the temptation to build a solution in search of a problem, a little bit. But if you're curious about what I am doing with that, it's at curiousduck.io, and I am building a simulation of software development so that you can experiment in the microcosm instead of having to see how experiments play out over a period of years.
Yeah, and I'm really, well, you blog a little bit about, or you write a little bit about it on Curious Duck, so it's really interesting to see what's happening there. So I'm definitely one of the curious people following Curious Duck. So I also like the way ducks keep popping up with you every time. I remember even this week, I don't know, there was somebody talking about a duck on Twitter, and I thought, oh, I should tell Elisabeth, because it's somehow ducks remind me always about you. Also, that I think that was your first book that you published on LeanPub. That was just with a lot of stuff grouped on that came from your blog, I think.
Yeah.
But that's yeah, it's just ways to remind people and to think about people. So for me, until eternity, I think every time I hear somebody talking about a duck, I think about you. So there's probably worse things to be remembered by. So that's nice. So thank you again for your time. It's at the same time, it's kind of feel bad because we had to redo the interview. But yeah, it's well, for me, the answers I liked so much last time, they were still here, and there was a few that became much better. So it's even better for me. So I'm really happy. So thank you for your time. And yes,
Thank
if
you.
people, well, I'm again, this is starting up. So for the people here, if you know how this works on YouTube, you just like, subscribe, whatever, to have more of these kind of conversations with, like Elisabeth proposed already, a few people, and with a lot more people. So thank you very much. Bye bye.